Sundar Pichai stepped out of the quiet car as the early morning sun bathed Mumbai's streets in a soft golden glow. His heart beat slow and steady, but his mind was already racing with thoughts of the day ahead. The air was thick with the smell of fresh pav and the distant sound of horns. Sundar had returned to India for a special event, one that was meant to inspire millions of young people who looked up to him as a symbol of possibility and hope. He was not dressed like a CEO today. Instead, he wore a simple white kurta and carried only a small cloth bag over his shoulder, which held nothing but a notebook and a pen. He believed that when you want to talk to the soul of a country, you must come as a simple man, not as a giant. Just as Sundar adjusted his bag, he noticed a small group of children running barefoot along the street, their laughter echoing between the buildings. He smiled softly, remembering his own childhood days in Chennai, where he once ran through the dusty roads without shoes, dreaming of a future that seemed impossibly far. Today, he had returned not to show off his success, but to share that same dream with young minds. He believed that every child carried a spark, waiting to become a fire if only someone believed in them. He wanted to be that someone. As he walked toward the hall where the event would take place, his eyes met an elderly man sitting on the footpath selling chai. Sundar stopped, bent down, and bought a cup. He sipped slowly, chatting with the man about cricket, monsoon rains, and life's simple joys. In that moment, Sundar felt more connected to his roots than ever before. Inside the hall, hundreds of people had already gathered. Young students sat shoulder to shoulder on the floor, some clutching old notebooks, some holding sketchbooks filled with dreams. Parents stood in the back, their eyes filled with both pride and worry, knowing how hard it was to keep their children's hopes alive in a world that often seemed cruel and unfair. There was a buzz of excitement because Shahrukh Khan, the beloved actor, was also invited to speak. Everyone whispered about how two giants from completely different worlds would share the same stage. But what no one knew was that behind the bright lights and smiling faces, a silent storm was brewing. As Sundar stepped onto the stage, he paused for a moment to look at the sea of young faces staring up at him. He felt a deep wave of emotion wash over him, a feeling so strong it almost brought tears to his eyes. He started by sharing his story in the simplest words, describing how he once stood in line for hours to get a single engineering book, how he struggled to understand lectures because he didn't have a proper chair or table at home, how he almost gave up more times than he could count. Yet he always held on to one thing, the quiet faith that he was meant to do something meaningful. He told them that it wasn't intelligence or money that helped him rise, but humility, kindness, and an endless hunger to learn. The students listened so quietly that even the hum of the fans above sounded loud. In the corner, Shahrukh Khan stood, waiting for his turn to speak. He watched Sundar carefully, but his face showed something unexpected, a trace of coldness that didn't match the warmth of the moment. Shahrukh, known for his charm and charisma, had always been celebrated as the king of hearts, but today he felt a strange discomfort. Had come expecting to be the star, to be the center of every cheer and every tear. But as he saw the audience hang on to every word of Sundar, a silent jealousy began to creep into his heart. The children's eyes sparkled not for a movie hero, but for a real-life story that seemed touchable, believable. After Sundar finished, the crowd erupted in applause. That lasted longer than anyone had expected. Students jumped to their feet, some with tears rolling down their cheeks. Sundar didn't wave dramatically or blow kisses. He simply pressed his palms together and bowed his head. That small gesture carried more weight than 1,000 words. It was a bow of respect, a silent promise that he was one of them, not above them. Then, Shahrukh stepped forward, his face frozen in a forced smile. He took the mic, and with his famous deep voice, began to joke about his films and his king status. Some people laughed politely, but the energy had already shifted. The hall no longer felt like a theater. It felt like a temple of dreams, where every child saw a reflection of their struggles and hopes in Sundar's story. When the speeches ended, the organizers invited both Sundar and Shahrukh to stand side by side for photographs. A long line of Students and guests formed, waiting to shake hands, take selfies, and offer flowers. Sundar stood patiently nodding and thanking each person, holding every hand firmly but gently. When Shahrukh finally approached Sundar to shake hands in front of everyone, something unexpected happened. Shahrukh looked at Sundar, paused for a second, and then, with a small flick of his wrist, he pulled his hand back and turned to the crowd as if nothing had happened. The hall fell into a heavy silence. Cameras clicked, but no one cheered. Sundar looked at Shahrukh with calm eyes that did not judge or burn with anger, but eyes that understood something deeper than words could express. Then, without saying a single word, Sundar turned to the students, bent slightly, started shaking their hands one by one again, as if the incident had never occurred. In that silent refusal, something massive cracked open inside the room. The students looked at Sundar with even more respect, sensing his deep humility and unbreakable kindness. Many felt a strange warmth in their chests, as if they had just witnessed a silent lesson more powerful than any speech. Parents began whispering to each other, some with tears pooling in their eyes, about how Sundar's quiet strength had just taught them a new meaning of dignity and grace. Even some teachers, standing at the edge of the hall, clutched their hands tightly, struggling to hide their emotions. Outside the hall, the news spread like fire. Reporters who had come expecting to write about glamorous selfies and celebrity jokes now found themselves scribbling feverishly about a silent moment that had shaken India's heart. Social media started exploding with photos of Sundar bowing to students and ignoring the awkwardness of the handshake. Some people shared the pictures with captions like the silent reply that echoed across the nation, and "Real king stands without a crown." Hashtags began trending within minutes. People everywhere started debating about what had happened. Some supported Shahrukh, saying maybe it was just a misunderstanding. But the majority saw Sundar's reaction as an example of true leadership and maturity. As Sundar stepped out of the hall, the afternoon sun had risen high above, casting long shadows on the ground. He felt the warmth on his face and took a deep breath. A small boy ran up to him, holding a folded piece of paper. Sundar bent down, took the paper gently, and opened it. Inside was a small sketch of Sundar standing like a tree with little hearts drawn around it. The boy looked up and whispered, "You are my tree, sir." Sundar felt his eyes sting. He patted the boy's head and tucked the drawing into his cloth bag, feeling a deep sense of responsibility grow inside him. He realized that today was not just a speaking event. It was the beginning of something much bigger, something that could change how young people saw their future. As he walked toward his car, the sound of distant drums and chants floated through the air. He paused, looking back at the hall, feeling the weight of a million dreams resting on his shoulders. He knew that he could not let them down now. He had to become not just a symbol of success, but a guide, a mentor, a silent force standing behind every child who dared to dream. As the car pulled away from the hall, Sundar looked out the window. Seeing young girls holding hands, boys trying to jump high enough to touch the leaves of a mango tree, old women selling marigolds on the roadside, he saw not just a city, but a living, breathing story of resilience and hope. In his heart, he promised to protect that story, no matter how hard the journey ahead might become. But somewhere deep in the city, Shahrukh sat alone in his dressing room, staring at his hand, the hand he had refused to offer. He felt a strange emptiness growing inside, a loneliness that fame and applause could never fill. He did not yet know that Sundar's silent reply would soon spread beyond this event. Beyond the city, and even beyond the country, it would start to shake powerful minds, inspire silent revolutions in classrooms, and wake up leaders who had long forgotten the value of quiet strength. Sundar's car finally reached the guest house where he was staying. As he stepped out, a soft breeze played with the edge of his kurta, and he looked up at the sky, feeling the weight of a new beginning. He knew that the world had seen his reply, but the true meaning of it would take time to blossom. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more criticism, more unexpected challenges. But for now, he felt calm, almost peaceful. He walked slowly into his room, sat by the window, and took out the boy's drawing again. He studied it carefully, as if trying to read a secret message hidden in those simple lines. At that moment, far away, journalists gathered in newsrooms. Editors argued over headlines, and young students scribbled Sundar's name into their diaries with shaking hands. Parents discussed the event over evening tea, their voices trembling with excitement and worry. No one knew what would happen next, but everyone felt that something big was coming, something that could shift the very soul of India. As the night sky covered Mumbai in a deep blanket of stars, Sundar sat by his window, breathing slowly. The city lights twinkled below like scattered jewels, and he closed his eyes, remembering every handshake, every tearful face, every hopeful voice. In that silence, he heard a quiet call from the future, a call he could not ignore. He promised himself that he would answer it, not with loud words, but with silent, strong actions. And somewhere in the darkness, a phone buzzed with a new message that would change everything the next morning. Sundar opened his eyes, feeling the chill of the coming storm, knowing the journey had only just begun. The sun rose lazily over Mumbai, painting the sky with gentle shades of pink and orange. The city began to wake up, unaware that today it would become the center of a story bigger than any film or news headline. Inside the small guesthouse room, Sundar Pichai sat by the window, holding the boy's drawing in his hand. He had not slept much. The memory of yesterday's event still floated around his mind like silent waves in a dark sea. He could still feel the warmth of each child's handshake, the trembling voice of the boy who called him a tree, the heavy silence when Shahrukh refused his hand. As the first rays of sunlight touched his face, he felt something shift inside him, a quiet but unstoppable determination. He stood up, carefully folded the drawing, and placed it inside his cloth bag. He washed his face in the small bathroom, splashing cold water over and over, as if trying to wash away every doubt and every shadow that still clung to him. In the mirror, he saw not the powerful CEO known around the world, but a simple man with tired eyes and a heart that refused to stop dreaming. He tied the strings of his kurta, straightened his shoulders, and stepped out into the morning air, breathing deeply. Today, he had decided to visit one of Mumbai's oldest government schools, a place where hundreds of children came every day, hoping for a better future, even though the walls were cracked and the windows broken. When he arrived at the school, he saw children sweeping the dusty courtyard with small brooms made of old twigs. Their faces were bright, their laughter pure, even though their feet were covered in dust and their uniforms had holes. Sundar watched them for a moment, feeling a lump in his throat. He remembered his own school days in Chennai, sitting on the cold floor, scribbling notes with a pencil that had been sharpened down to almost nothing. He walked towards them slowly, and as they noticed him, their eyes widened in surprise. Some dropped their brooms and ran to the teachers, shouting excitedly that a big guest had come. The headmaster came rushing out, wiping sweat from his forehead with an old handkerchief. He bowed deeply to Sundar and invited him inside. Inside the main hall, Sundar sat cross-legged on the floor with the children, refusing the plastic chair the teachers tried to bring for him. He began to talk to them about small things at first. How to imagine a future, how to hold on to dreams even when they seem silly, how kindness can become a superpower in a world that often feels cruel. He spoke slowly, using simple words, watching each face light up as he shared his stories. He described how he used to collect broken electronics and try to fix them, even though most people laughed and called him foolish. He told them about the nights he stayed awake just to understand a single sentence in an engineering book, how he felt lost but kept going because he believed someone somewhere needed him to succeed. The children listened as if they were listening to a bedtime story under a starry sky. Their eyes sparkled with questions, their small hands clenched in excitement. A small girl with two tight braids raised her hand shyly and asked Sundar if he ever felt scared. Sundar paused, his smile softening. He told her he felt scared almost every day, scared of failing, scared of not being good enough, scared of losing the people he loved. But he also told her that fear is like a shadow. It only grows if you turn your back to it. If you face it, it starts to shrink. Her eyes grew big, and she whispered to her friend sitting beside her. Sundar saw that moment, and he felt that tiny, quiet joy that only comes when you see someone's heart open to a new possibility. Outside the hall, a group of journalists had already gathered, their cameras ready, their microphones buzzing with questions about the incident with Shahrukh. Some of them wanted drama, some wanted controversy. But they didn't know that today they would witness something far beyond their expectations. As Sundar stepped out of the hall, a young journalist in a blue shirt stepped forward and asked loudly, "Sir, why didn't you respond when Shahrukh refused to shake your hand? Don't you think you should have defended yourself publicly?" Sundar looked at him for a long moment, his eyes calm and steady. He replied softly, "Sometimes silence carries more truth than 1,000 loud words. I didn't need to defend myself because every child in that hall understood what respect and kindness look like. My work is not to fight or argue, but to show another way to be strong, a quiet, peaceful way." The journalist stood frozen, his microphone shaking slightly. The other reporters fell silent, their pens hovering in the air. Sundar smiled faintly and walked past them, moving towards the children playing in the yard. One boy handed him a piece of chalk and pulled him towards a broken blackboard leaning against a tree. Sundar laughed, took the chalk and began to draw simple circuits and shapes, explaining how electricity flows like a river, how it lights up small bulbs, how ideas are like currents that need open paths. The children gathered around, pushing closer, eyes wide, some even standing on tiptoes to see better. Meanwhile, somewhere across the city, Shahrukh sat in his luxury apartment, staring at the television screen. News channels replayed the handshake moment over and over, analyzing it from every angle. Some anchors defended him, saying maybe he was distracted or tired, while others criticized him harshly, saying he had shown arrogance in front of innocent children. Shahrukh felt restless. He tried to call his old friends, but none of the conversations made him feel better. He felt as if he had lost something invisible but important, something that applause and cheers could not replace. He switched off the television and walked to the balcony, looking down at the busy roads. He remembered Sundar's calm face, those gentle eyes that did not accuse him or judge him, but silently taught a lesson he wasn't ready to learn. Back at the school, as Sundar finished his impromptu lesson, the children clapped and shouted, calling him big brother and teacher uncle. Sundar laughed softly, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. The headmaster stood nearby, tears glistening in his eyes, whispering to himself about how he had never seen the children. So alive, so fearless. Some parents who had come to pick up their children stood quietly under the trees, hands pressed together in silent gratitude. One elderly woman approached Sundar and pressed a small packet of sweets into his hand, insisting he take it as a blessing. Sundar bowed deeply, his eyes moist, and accepted it with both hands, treating it like a priceless treasure. Just as Sundar was about to leave, his phone buzzed. It was a message from a government official, inviting him to a private meeting later that day. The message was vague, but hinted that the Central Education Board wanted to discuss something important with him. Sundar felt a sudden heaviness in his chest. He knew that whenever power decided to listen, it often carried hidden traps and expectations. He folded the message away and stepped into the waiting car, his mind racing with questions. He wondered if this was the beginning of a larger plan, a way to use his influence for some political purpose, or perhaps an invitation to start a new journey that might be bigger than anything he had ever imagined. On the way to the meeting, Sundar looked out the window at the endless stream of people, hawkers selling colorful bangles, auto drivers calling for passengers, women balancing, water pots on their heads, children chasing stray dogs. He felt both a deep love and a quiet sadness for his country. He saw so much potential, so much raw beauty, but also so much pain hidden beneath daily struggles. He knew that change could not come from speeches alone. It had to grow from every small act of kindness, every quiet moment of courage. He promised himself that whatever the meeting might hold, he would not allow his silence to be used as a weapon or a shield. He would stay true to the children, to the boy who called him a tree, to the girl who asked about fear. As the car stopped outside a tall government building, Sundar stepped out, squinting at the harsh afternoon sun. A group of men in crisp white shirts waited at the entrance, their faces tight and serious. One of them stepped forward, introduced himself as a senior advisor, and led Sundar inside. They walked through long corridors lined with framed photos of old leaders and thick red carpets that smelled faintly of dust and polish. Finally, they entered a large conference room, where a group of officials sat around a heavy wooden table. At the center sat a tall man with sharp eyes and a quiet authority in his posture. He stood up slowly and gestured for Sundar to sit across from him. For a few moments there was only silence. The air felt heavy, as if every breath carried a secret. Then the tall man leaned forward and spoke in a low voice. "We saw what happened. Yesterday, India saw it. We believe that you have the power to move hearts, to wake up young minds. We want to offer you a national role, an ambassador of education and innovation. We want you to guide policies, inspire teachers, and become a face for our new education revolution." The words fell heavily in the room. Sundar sat still, his mind replaying the children's faces. The dusty school courtyard, the broken chalk pieces. He realized the weight of what was being offered. It was not just a title, it was a responsibility that could change millions of lives or destroy his own peace forever. He thought about his promise to himself, the promise to protect dreams quietly, without becoming a puppet of power. Yet he also felt the possibility of doing real, lasting good, of building bridges that no one else could even imagine. After a long silence, Sundar looked up, his eyes calm but fierce, and said, "If I accept this, I will not do it for awards, headlines, or political favors. I will do it only if I can work directly with the children, the teachers, and the communities. No scripted speeches, no hidden agendas." The officials looked at each other, some nodding slowly, some frowning. The tall man leaned back, studying Sundar carefully. Then he gave a small nod and said, "We will think about your conditions. We will let you know soon." Sundar stood up, pressed his palms together, and bowed slightly before turning to leave. As he walked out, he felt the eyes of every official burning into his back, some curious, some jealous, some deeply afraid of the silent power he carried as he stepped outside. The late afternoon breeze hit his face, bringing a sudden sense of relief and freedom. He felt light, as if he had just crossed an invisible river. He looked up at the sky, thinking of the children again, thinking of that boy's sketch, the two-braided girl, the old woman's sweets. He realized that in this moment, he was no longer just Sundar Pichai, the CEO, or the guest speaker. He had become a silent guardian of dreams, a quiet warrior in a battle that had no weapons, only hearts. But in the shadows of the city, Shahrukh sat alone, listening to advisors and friends urging him to make a public apology or statement. His mind was a storm of pride, regret, and confusion. He looked at his own reflection, feeling the walls around his image start to crack. He wondered if he would ever be able to regain the trust and love he felt slipping away. And deep inside, he feared that his silence now might turn into a wound he could never heal. As Sundar's car rolled back towards the guest house, his phone buzzed once again. This time, it was a simple message from a young girl he had met at the school. It said, "You told us to face fear. Today I stood up to my uncle, who told me girls cannot become engineers. I told him I will show him one day. Thank you." Sundar read the message, closed his eyes, and let a single tear escape down his cheek. He knew then, without a doubt, that the path ahead would be long and full of storms, but he also knew he was exactly where he needed to be. Tomorrow would bring Shahrukh's next move, a sudden twist that no one could see coming. The world would watch with bated breath, and Sundar, the silent tree in the storm, would have to decide whether to stand firm or to bend in ways he never imagined. Night wrapped around Mumbai like an old blanket, full of quiet secrets and hidden tears. Now the streets still hummed softly with the sounds of late-night vendors, distant auto horns, and stray dogs barking at shadows. In his small guest-house room, Sundar Pichai sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by sheets of paper and a small clay lamp flickering beside him. He was writing down thoughts that had been burning inside his mind all day, thoughts that felt too heavy to carry alone. Every sentence he wrote felt like a thread in a much larger tapestry. A story that belonged not just to him, but to every child he had met. Every teacher who struggled with broken chalk pieces, every parent who sold their last piece of jewelry to buy a textbook. Sundar paused to stretch his fingers, then looked out the small window. Far away, he could see the faint outline of the sea, shimmering under the moonlight like a silver promise. He thought about the message from the girl who had stood up to her uncle. Her courage felt like a spark that could light thousands of candles in dark rooms across the country. He felt a sudden ache in his chest, a deep longing to hold on to these fragile sparks before the world tried to blow them out with cynicism and hate. He knew the journey ahead would be lonely, full of traps laid by those who feared change. But his heart beat steady with a kind of fearless calm he had never known before. While Sundar wrestled with his thoughts, in another corner of the city, Shahrukh sat in his private lounge, his face half hidden in the glow of a giant TV screen playing old movie clips. He watched himself laughing, dancing, being adored by millions. He paused the video and stared at his own frozen smile, trying to remember when he had last felt truly alive. His advisors stood nearby, whispering about how to fix his image, suggesting press statements, carefully staged charity events, or emotional interviews. But their words felt like distant echoes in an empty cave. Inside Shahrukh, a quiet storm raged, a mix of regret, pride, and fear. He thought of Sundar's calm face, the hand he refused to shake, and the eyes that had looked at him with a kindness that felt more cutting than any insult. Suddenly, Shahrukh stood up sharply, startling his advisors. He told them to leave. The room emptied. He walked to the mirror and looked at himself closely. He touched his own face as if trying to recognize the man staring back. He whispered to the reflection, "What have you become?" His voice cracked, echoing softly in the silent room. He felt a tear slip down his cheek, surprising him. He had cried on camera 1,000 times, but this tear felt real, raw, almost alive. He knew that the children who had watched him yesterday did not see a king. They saw a man afraid to share a simple moment of respect. A man who had lost his connection to the very people who made him a star. Back in the guest house, Sundar finally stood up, placed the pages carefully in his bag, and blew out the small lamp. He lay down on the thin mattress, listening to the distant sounds of the city, feeling each noise vibrate through his bones like an ancient song. As he drifted into a light sleep, he dreamed of a large banyan tree standing in a crowded schoolyard. Under its wide branches, children gathered with books and small lunchboxes. Some climbed the tree, some leaned against it to study, and some simply sat in its shade and laughed. In the dream, Sundar was not speaking or giving speeches. He simply stood beside the tree, watching, protecting, and waiting patiently for each child to find their own way. He woke up suddenly at dawn, covered in sweat, heart pounding. For a moment, he felt lost between the dream and reality, but then he heard a soft knock on the door. He stood up quickly, opened it, and saw a young boy standing there, clutching a small brown envelope. The boy's hair was messy and his eyes looked tired but determined. He handed the envelope to Sundar and whispered, "This is from Shahrukh, sir." Before Sundar could say anything, the boy turned and ran down the hallway. Disappearing into the morning light, Sundar closed the door, gently sat down, and opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, the paper creased and smudged, as if it had been rewritten many times. The letter began with simple words, "Dear Sundar, I don't know how to start this, but I need to try." Shahrukh poured out his heart, in shaky sentences, admitting that he had lost his way, that he had let pride and fame build walls around him so high he could no longer see the ground. He wrote about feeling small next to Sundar's quiet strength, about realizing that he had been playing a role for so long that he forgot who he really was. He ended the letter with a single, heavy line, "I want to change, but I don't know how. Will you help me learn to stand like that tree?" Sundar read the letter twice, then folded it slowly, pressing his palm over it, as if sealing the words inside his heart. He felt a deep sadness for Shahrukh, but also a spark of hope. He knew that helping Shahrukh would not be easy. It would means stepping into a world filled with cameras, judgments, and constant noise. But he also believed that no one was too far gone to change if they truly wanted to. He took out his notebook and began to write a reply, his pen moving slowly, carefully choosing each word as if planting seeds in a new field. After finishing, Sundar stepped out into the fresh morning air, feeling the soft breeze brush against his face. He asked a young staff member to deliver the letter to Shahrukh. As he watched the boy run down the street, he felt a strange stillness inside, as if a new chapter had quietly begun without any loud announcement or fanfare. He turned back to his room, packed his small bag, and decided to visit another school, this time in a smaller neighborhood where children studied under tin roofs and sat on rough mats. When Sundar arrived at the school, he saw teachers repairing broken benches, students helping paint faded walls, and small girls filling water from a leaky pipe. The principal greeted Sundar with tears in his eyes, explaining how the children had started fixing the school themselves after seeing videos of Sundar's visit to the city school the previous day. They said they didn't want to wait for someone else to bring change. They wanted to start with their own hands. Sundar felt his chest tighten, his eyes clouding with tears he tried to hide. He joined them without hesitation, picking up a brush and helping paint a wall. He laughed with the children, splashed paint accidentally on his kurta, and felt more alive than in any boardroom meeting he had ever attended. As the day passed, word spread quickly. Reporters arrived again, but this time they did not crowd him with difficult questions. Instead, they stood back, taking photos of Sundar, laughing with the children, carrying buckets of water and sharing simple meals on the floor. These images went viral instantly, breaking through screens and entering living rooms across India. Mothers watched while preparing dinner. Fathers shared videos with their friends at tea stalls. Grandparents whispered blessings in front of small television sets. The story of the silent handshake had now grown into something no one could stop. A quiet revolution led by a man with no loud slogans, no giant banners, only a deep love and respect for every child's dream. That evening, as Sundar washed his paint-streaked hands under a small tap, he looked up to see a group of older boys standing nearby. They seemed shy but carried a strange seriousness in their eyes. One of them stepped forward and said, "Sir, we want to ask you something important. Our community doesn't allow us to study beyond a certain age. They say we must start working and earning for the family. We want to learn more. We want to become engineers, doctors, teachers. Can you help us?" Sundar looked at them silently for a moment, feeling the weight of their hopes pressing into his chest like a heavy stone. He stepped forward, placed his hands on the boys' shoulders and said, "You have already taken the biggest step by asking this question. I will stand with you. Together, we will find a way." The boys' faces changed instantly, their eyes shining with a light that no force could extinguish. They rushed forward to hug him, some crying softly into his shoulders. Sundar held them close, feeling their small hearts beating with new courage. He knew in that moment that his path had forever changed. He was no longer just a visitor or a guest speaker. He had become a father figure, a protector, a quiet guardian standing against generations of silence and fear. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep shades of purple and gold, Sundar stood quietly in the yard watching the boys run back to their friends, already talking about new plans and secret dreams. He felt a gentle breeze carry the smell of fresh paint and earth. In that peaceful moment, a staff member rushed to him with a small phone, saying breathlessly, "Sir, it's Shahrukh. He wants to speak to you right now." Sundar took the phone. Feeling the world slow around him, he pressed it to his ear and heard Shahrukh's trembling voice say, "I read your letter. I want to meet you tomorrow. In person, please." Sundar closed his eyes, feeling a silent wave crash over him. He knew this meeting would not be simple. It would mean facing not just Shahrukh's pain, but his own reflections, his own hidden fears. He understood that this would become more than just a conversation. It would become a defining moment for both of them. A chance to build a new bridge, or watch one collapse forever. As he handed the phone back, his hands shook slightly, but his face remained calm. He turned to look at the children one last time before leaving. their laughter echoing behind him like a gentle blessing. As he climbed into the car, he looked up at the night sky filled with countless stars, each one a silent witness to the dreams below. He whispered softly to himself, "Tomorrow, the real test begins." His eyes glistened in the moonlight, reflecting both fear and a quiet, unstoppable strength. Deep inside, he felt that tomorrow's meeting could either mend a broken spirit or break them both in ways they could not yet imagine. And somewhere, Shahrukh sat alone in his room, holding Sundar's letter against his chest, his heart pounding, his mind filled with 1,000 questions and one fragile hope. The next morning arrived like a hesitant guest, slipping quietly into Mumbai's crowded streets. The city had already begun its daily dance, tea sellers shouting on corners, children rushing to school, women carrying bags of vegetables on their heads, and drivers weaving through impossible traffic. In a quiet guest house room, Sundar Pichai stood by the window, watching the morning unfold with a heavy heart. The letter from Shahrukh still lay on the table beside him, its words echoing in his mind like a song played over and over. Sundar felt a strange mix of calm and storm inside him, as if two oceans were meeting in his chest, each wave carrying both hope and fear. He washed his face slowly, his fingers moving like a silent prayer across his skin. He wore the same simple white kurta he had worn when he visited the schools, refusing the crisp suit that hung neatly in his bag. He believed deeply that true strength did not need to be dressed up. It shone through even the simplest cloth. He tied the string of his kurta. He thought about the boys who had hugged him yesterday, the girls who had painted walls beside him, and the young girl who had dared to challenge her uncle. Each face felt like a small lamp, lighting up the dark corners of his mind. He knew that today's meeting with Shahrukh was more than a personal conversation. It was a test of what kind of leader he truly wanted to become. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Shahrukh sat alone in a large, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with awards and framed photographs from his long career, snapshots of smiling faces, flashing lights, and roaring crowds. But today those images felt like ghosts haunting him, reminders of a world he no longer recognized. He wore a simple black kurta instead of his usual designer clothes, his hair unstyled, his face unshaven. He had not slept all night, his mind circling around one question: how did he lose the ability to see beyond the stage lights? He kept Sundar's reply letter close to his heart, reading it so many times that the edges had softened and the ink had almost faded. He thought of the moment he had refused Sundar's handshake, a moment that now felt like a deep wound on his spirit. He remembered the shocked faces in the audience, the heavy silence that followed, and Sundar's gentle, unwavering eyes. Those eyes did not burn with anger, but glowed with a quiet disappointment that hurt more than any loud insult. Time in his life, Shahrukh realized that applause and fame could not fill the empty spaces in his soul. He wanted to find a way back, to reconnect with the parts of himself he had buried under layers of pride and fear. The meeting was set in a small community center, far from luxury hotels or shining office towers. Sundar chose the place because he wanted it to be honest and simple, a space where hearts could speak without fear. As Sundar's car pulled up, he stepped out and looked around. Children were playing cricket in a narrow alley nearby, their laughter ringing clear in the morning air. A few curious faces peeked from nearby windows, whispering excitedly about the two giants meeting today. Sundar walked slowly toward the center, his steps steady, his mind calm but alert. He felt every heartbeat as if it carried the weight of all the children's hopes on his shoulders. Inside, Shahrukh sat alone on a wooden bench, his head bowed, fingers twisting the edge of Sundar's letter. When Sundar entered, he paused at the door, studying the man before him. Shahrukh looked up slowly, his eyes red and tired, his face open and vulnerable in a way Sundar had never seen before. For a moment, neither spoke. The air felt thick, heavy, with things left unsaid, with wounds hidden beneath layers of old pride. Sundar stepped forward, sat down beside Shahrukh, and placed his hands on his knees, waiting patiently. He knew that healing could not be forced. It had to bloom quietly, like a lotus in muddy water, Finally, Shahrukh took a deep breath, his voice trembling as he began. I don't know how to say this, but I need to try. I have been lost for so long. I forgot what it means to truly see people, to touch their lives without expecting applause in return. Yesterday, when I saw those children look at you, I felt something break inside me. I felt small, empty. I realized I had been performing all my life, even when I thought I was being real. He paused, wiping a tear from his cheek with shaking fingers. Sundar listened silently, his eyes soft but unflinching, his breath slow and deep. Shahrukh continued, his voice breaking again. I wanted to be a hero, but somewhere along the way I became a prisoner of my own image. Your silence after the handshake. It was like a mirror showing me who I had become. I don't know if I can change, but I want to try. Please, teach me how to stand like you, how to be a tree that gives without asking, that stands even when storms come. The words hung in the air like fragile glass, each syllable echoing off the plain walls of the room. Sundar placed his hand gently on Shahrukh's shoulder, his fingers warm and steady. He spoke softly, each word carrying the weight of years of quiet struggle. You already took the first step by seeing yourself clearly. That is the hardest battle. Being a tree is not about perfection. It is about standing firm even when you feel broken inside. It is about giving shade, even when your own leaves are falling. It is about listening deeply, even when the world is screaming around you. Shahrukh lowered his head, tears streaming. Freely now, falling onto the old wooden floor, they sat in silence for a long time. The kind of silence that heals more deeply than words. Outside, the sounds of children playing drifted in, weaving a gentle background music to this quiet, powerful moment. Sundar reached into his bag and took out the boy's drawing of the tree. He unfolded it carefully and handed it to Shahrukh. This is the tree you want to become. Strong, patient, giving. You will not become it in a day or even in a year. But every small step you take toward kindness and humility will grow your roots deeper. Shahrukh took the drawing with shaking hands, his eyes moving over each line as if he were reading an ancient scripture. He pressed it to his chest, closing, his eyes feeling something shift inside him, a quiet opening, a soft surrender. He felt as if the walls he had built around his heart were finally beginning to crumble, brick by brick, letting light and air flood into spaces that had long been dark and silent. As they stood up, Shahrukh looked at Sundar, his eyes clear for the first time in years. He whispered, "Thank you, Sundar. I don't deserve your kindness, but I promise I will try to live up to it." Sundar smiled gently, placing both hands on Shahrukh's shoulders, and said, "Every person deserves a second chance. What you do with it is what defines you, not your past mistakes." Outside the center, a small crowd had gathered quietly. When they saw Sundar and Shahrukh step out together, they stood still, some holding their breath, while some pressing their palms together in silent respect. A few children ran forward shyly, offering marigold flowers to Sundar. And to everyone's surprise, they handed flowers to Shahrukh as well. Shahrukh knelt down to accept them, his hands trembling, his eyes glistening with tears he did not try to hide. In that moment, he felt something pure and strong flow into him, like sunlight breaking through a stormy sky. The reporters who had rushed to cover the meeting did not shout questions or push forward with microphones. Instead, they stood silently, capturing the moment without words. They understood instinctively that this was not a scene for headlines, but a quiet chapter in a story larger than themselves. People started sharing photos online, but this time the captions were different. A king who learns to bow, two giants, one silent lesson, the tree and the star. Later, as Sundar prepared to leave, Shahrukh pulled him aside and asked, "Can I come with you to the next school visit? I want to learn, to watch, to feel what you feel when you stand among them." Sundar paused, studying Shahrukh's face, searching for any sign of performance or hidden pride. Finding none, he nodded slowly and said, "Yes, but only if you come, not as Shahrukh the star, but as Shahrukh the student." Shahrukh's face softened into a shy, almost childlike smile. He nodded eagerly, his shoulders straightening as if he had finally put down a heavy burden he had carried alone for too long. That evening, as the sun dipped into the Arabian Sea, turning the sky into a painting of molten gold and purple, Sundar, and Shahrukh sat together in a small tea shop. They shared simple cups of chai, breaking pieces of warm samosas, laughing quietly like old friends. The shop owner watched them from behind the counter, shaking his head in disbelief. He had seen countless celebrities pass by over the years, but he had never seen two such different men sit together with so much humility and warmth as they finished their tea. Sundar looked out at the passing crowds, his mind already thinking of the children, the classrooms, the broken chalk pieces waiting for him tomorrow. He felt Shahrukh watching him, waiting for guidance, for silent lessons hidden between simple gestures. Sundar knew that the real work was only beginning. Helping Shahrukh transform would be like tending a wounded tree, slow, painful, requiring patience beyond measure. But he believed that if even one soul could be turned toward kindness and humility, it would ripple outward, touching countless others. When they stood to leave, Shahrukh turned to Sundar, his voice steady but soft. "Tomorrow, I will come with you. I will listen, watch, and learn. No cameras, no speeches, just me and the children." Sundar placed a hand on his back, guiding him gently toward the narrow street, lit only by flickering shop lights and the soft glow of small diyas outside doorsteps. They walked together into the deepening night. Two silhouettes moving side by side, one a man who had always stood in the spotlight, the other a man who had learned to light the way in silence. As they disappeared into the alley, a small group of young boys watched them go, whispering excitedly about the quiet magic they had just seen. In that moment, something shifted in the city's heartbeat, a soft, almost invisible change that promised new possibilities. But deep inside, Sundar felt the stirrings of a storm yet to come. He sensed that not everyone would welcome this new alliance. Somewhere in the shadows, powerful voices were beginning to murmur, afraid of the silent revolution growing stronger every day. The early morning sky over Mumbai glowed with a soft golden light, as if the sun itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would unfold. In a quiet room filled with the faint smell of incense and old books, Sundar Pichai sat on a low wooden stool, his hands resting gently on his knees. The silence in the room was deep and comforting, like a protective blanket around his thoughts. His mind drifted back to the children he had met, their shining eyes and unstoppable questions. He thought of the boy who had called him a tree, the girl who had dared to fight for her right to learn, and the group of boys who dreamed of becoming engineers despite their family's resistance. Each memory pulsed like a heartbeat inside him, reminding him why he had started this journey. Today was different. Today he would not go alone. Shahrukh would join him, not as a star, but as a student, a man trying to rebuild himself from the roots. Sundar felt a quiet excitement mixed with a subtle tension. He knew this was a fragile moment for Shahrukh, a chance to step out of the shadow of his own fame and into the harsh, beautiful light of reality. Sundar closed his eyes and whispered a silent prayer, asking for strength, patience, and an open heart. He tied the string of his simple white kurta, picked up his cloth bag filled with old letters and small drawings from children, and stepped out into the brightening day. At the entrance of the guest house, Shahrukh stood waiting, wearing a plain off-white kurta, his hair combed back neatly, but without any styling gel or expensive fragrance. His face looked softer, his eyes a little unsure, but filled with a new kind of determination. When Sundar approached, Shahrukh pressed his palms together and bowed slightly, a gesture that felt genuine and unpracticed. Sundar smiled, returning the gesture, and together they walked toward a small car waiting by the roadside. The driver, an old man with kind eyes, opened the door, bowing deeply as they climbed in. As the car moved through the narrow streets, Shahrukh watched the world outside with wide, searching eyes. As if he was seeing his own country for the first time, children ran alongside the road, waving and laughing, some holding plastic kites, others kicking small rubber balls. Sundar pointed out small shops and street corners, telling Shahrukh small stories about a boy who saved coins for a single pencil, about a girl who taught herself math using chalk on the sidewalk. Each story felt like a pebble thrown into a still pond, creating ripples that reached deep inside Shahrukh's heart. He listened without interrupting, his head slightly bowed, his fingers nervously twisting the hem of his kurta. In that car, for the first time in many years, he felt like a student again, small, vulnerable, but alive in a way he had almost forgotten. They arrived at a small school built at the edge of a crowded slum, where the walls were covered with colorful paintings made by children. Some drawings showed trees and rivers, others showed rockets and stars. Dreams that seemed to stretch far beyond the narrow alleys and broken roofs. As Sundar and Shahrukh stepped out, children gathered around, instantly their voices rising in a soft, curious chorus. They did not rush to Shahrukh for selfies or autographs. Instead, they looked at him shyly, some hiding behind each other, their eyes moving between him and Sundar. Sundar bent down, smiling, touching the heads of the nearest children, asking their names, what they liked to study, what they wanted to become. Shahrukh stood back, watching closely, his fingers trembling slightly. After a few minutes, Sundar called Shahrukh forward. "Come, sit with us," he said, patting a small mat spread under a large neem tree. Shahrukh hesitated, then slowly sat down cross-legged beside Sundar. Children formed a circle around them, their faces full of wonder and hope. Sundar began to speak, telling them stories of his own childhood. How he shared one textbook with 3 friends. How he learned to fix broken radios to understand circuits. How he stayed awake under a dim lantern just to solve one math problem. Each word felt like a seed planted in fertile soil. Each sentence a small bridge connecting hearts. Then Sundar gently handed the moment to Shahrukh. The children turned to him, their small hands resting on their knees, their eyes wide open. Shahrukh swallowed hard, his mouth dry, his mind spinning. For the first time in his life, he did not have a script, no prepared lines, no polished performance. He looked at Sundar, who nodded silently, urging him forward with his calm gaze. Shahrukh took a deep breath and began to speak. His voice shook. At first, but slowly it found a rhythm. He talked about his own fears, the fear of failing, the fear of losing love, the fear of not being enough. He told them how he had hidden behind characters, applause, and bright lights because he was too scared to face his true self. As he spoke, tears slipped down his cheeks, but he did not wipe them away. The children listened without judgment, their eyes reflecting a deep, pure empathy that no award or fan club could ever give. One small boy raised his hand, his voice soft but clear. "Sir, were you ever lonely even when so many people cheered for you?" The question hit Shahrukh like a stone thrown into a still lake. He paused, looking at the boy, then nodded slowly. "Yes," he whispered, his voice barely above the breeze. "I was the loneliest when everyone was cheering the loudest." His confession hung in the air, heavy and raw. The children did not laugh or look away. Instead, they leaned closer, some touching his arm gently, as if trying to hold his pain in their small hands. Sundar watched this with quiet pride. He saw Shahrukh finally break open, finally touch the part of himself that was real and fragile. He knew this was the beginning of something rare and precious, a journey of healing that no movie camera could ever capture fully. After a long silence, Sundar spoke softly. "True strength is not in hiding your tears, but in sharing them without shame." Shahrukh looked at him with eyes that shone like morning dew, and in that gaze an unspoken promise was born. They spent the rest of the morning sitting with the children, helping them draw, solving small puzzles, and sharing pieces of homemade sweets. A young girl drew a picture of Shahrukh sitting under a tree with children around him and handed it to him shyly. He took it as if it were a priceless gift, his fingers tracing the lines again and again. For the first time in many years, he felt seen not as a star, but as a human. A man with faults, fears, and a longing to belong. The sun climbed high above them, but they did not notice. The world outside the school seemed to disappear, leaving only a small universe filled with simple smiles and small hands reaching out for comfort. As the afternoon arrived, Sundar suggested they gather the children for one last short talk before they left. He stood up, his voice calm and strong, echoing under the neem tree. He told them that dreams did not belong to the rich or the powerful alone. They belonged to anyone brave enough to keep believing when the world said no. He reminded them that they carried within them seeds of forests yet to grow, rivers yet to flow, stars yet to shine. He asked them to promise him that they would help each other, hold each other up, and never forget their own worth. The children nodded solemnly, their small faces glowing with determination. As they began to leave, Shahrukh felt a gentle tug on his kurta. He turned to see the same boy who had asked about loneliness. The boy looked up and said, "Today you are like us. You are not a hero in a film. You are my friend." Shahrukh knelt down, tears welling again, and hugged the boy tightly. In that embrace, he felt something old and heavy finally break apart, leaving behind a lightness he had never known. Sundar watched, his eyes soft, his heart full, knew that today was a turning point not just for Shahrukh but for everyone watching. As they walked back to the car, Shahrukh turned to Sundar and said, in a quiet, trembling voice, "I want to continue this journey. I want to visit more schools, meet more children. I want to learn how to give without expecting anything back." Sundar looked at him, a gentle smile spreading across his face, and said, "Then you must prepare yourself, because giving without expecting is the hardest lesson, but also the most beautiful one." But as they drove back into the city, a dark cloud began to form on the horizon, not in the sky, but in the halls of power. Powerful businessmen, influential media heads, and certain political leaders watched the rise of this new alliance with growing fear. They saw Sundar's silent revolution, the quiet transformation of Shahrukh, and the wave of new hope spreading among children and families. They whispered among themselves, plotting quietly, afraid of losing their grip on the hearts and minds of the people. In a glass tower overlooking the city, a group of executives and advisors sat around a large table. One man with cold eyes and a tight jaw slammed his hand on the table. "If this continues, we will lose control. The children are waking up, parents are questioning, and the old narratives are falling apart. We must act now before it's too late." Another man nodded slowly, his fingers tapping a glass of water. "We must find a way to discredit them, break their connection to the people, before they become too powerful to stop." As the sun set behind the city's skyline, casting long shadows over the crowded streets, Sundar and Shahrukh sat quietly in the back of their small car. Neither of them knew that a storm was already gathering, one that would test their courage and faith in ways they had never imagined. Sundar looked out at the fading light, feeling a cold shiver run down his spine, as if the universe itself was whispering a warning. He turned to Shahrukh, who looked back with a question in his eyes. But Sundar simply placed a reassuring hand on his arm. Even though his own heart trembled inside, in the distance the first stars began to appear, blinking softly like tiny watchful eyes. The city lights below flickered to life one by one, unaware of the silent battle that was about to begin. In that quiet car, between two men who had only just begun to understand themselves, a deep, unspoken understanding took shape, that whatever came next, they would face it together. The sky over Mumbai was heavy with clouds, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Deep inside, a narrow alleyway filled with the smell of wet earth and burning incense, Sundar Pichai sat on a small wooden stool, eyes closed, listening to the soft drizzle tapping against the tin roofs. The quiet sound felt like a secret song, reminding him of rainy days from his childhood when he would press his forehead against the window, dreaming of a world beyond the narrow streets of Chennai. But today, his mind was not on the past. It was on the storm that had begun to rise around him and Shahrukh, storm he had felt coming but could not yet fully see. Shahrukh sat nearby, hunched over, his hands clasped tightly together. His eyes darted around nervously as if he could already feel the sharp edges of coming danger. He had grown softer in recent days, opening himself up to the children, to the raw honesty that came with truly being seen. But that softness had also made him vulnerable, exposing cracks in his armor that he had spent a lifetime building. Sundar opened his eyes slowly, turned to Shahrukh, and gave a small, steady nod. "Whatever happens, we hold to the truth. Do not fight back with anger. We stand like the tree, remember?" His voice was low, but carried a power that seemed to echo even in the silent corners of the room. Shur swallowed hard, his throat dry. He nodded slowly, though fear still flickered in his eyes. He had faced angry crowds before, but this felt different. This time it was not about a film or a performance. It was about his soul, his new fragile self, that was still learning to breathe without applause. As the rain continued, a young boy burst into the room, his clothes soaked, his hair dripping. Held out a small crumpled note, gasping for breath. Sundar took it gently, unfolded it, and read it carefully. His face remained calm, but a flicker of sadness crossed his eyes. The note warned them that a powerful group of media leaders and businessmen had begun a campaign to discredit them. False stories were being prepared, stories painting Sundar as a manipulator, accusing him of using children for personal glory, and calling Shahrukh's transformation a cheap publicity stunt. They wanted to destroy the bond between the people. And these two men, before it grew too strong to break? Sundar set the note down slowly, the rain's rhythm now feeling louder, almost like drums of war. He turned to Shahrukh and said softly, "They will attack our silence because they are afraid of it. But we do not have to shout to prove who we are." Shahrukh stood up abruptly, pacing back and forth. "But what if people believe them? What if they turn on us? I am not as strong as you, Sundar. I don't know if I can stand there and let them spit lies without fighting back." His voice cracked, heavy with years of fear and pain. Sundar stood, walked over, and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You are stronger than you think. Strength is not about fighting louder. It is about standing so still that no storm can move you." Shahrukh closed his eyes, breathing deeply, trying to anchor himself in those words. As evening approached, they decided to go to the community hall, where they had planned to meet parents and children that day. Even though they knew trouble was waiting, they chose to go, believing deeply that abandoning the children now would destroy everything they had built so far. When they arrived, they found the hall already filled, but not with warm welcomes. Many parents looked worried, some angry. Whispers moved like cold wind through the crowd. Doubts planted by the campaign had started to grow. Cameras flashed outside, reporters ready to capture every small movement, every uncertain glance. Sundar stepped forward first. He looked at the crowd, his eyes soft but strong, his hands folded calmly in front of him. He did not raise his voice or wave his hands. Instead, he began to speak in a slow, clear voice, telling them why he had come to India, why he had chosen to walk among children rather than stand on grand stages. He shared stories of small hands gripping pencils for the first time, of a girl painting her future on broken walls, of boys repairing benches instead of waiting for miracles. He reminded them that real change did not come from noise and slogans, but from silent, shared moments of trust and hope. Some parents began to wipe their tears, their hands trembling. Others looked down, ashamed of having doubted. Shahrukh stepped up beside Sundar, his voice low and full of raw honesty. He confessed to them how he had lost himself in fame, how he had learned to hide his real face even from himself, and how it was Sundar's silence that had taught him to see again. He spoke of children who had taught him more in a week than he had learned in decades. His words felt like raindrops on dry soil, each one small but carrying life. Then, in a moment that no one expected, a young girl stood up from the back. Her hair was tied into loose braids, her dress simple but clean. She stepped forward, her small hands shaking. She looked at Sundar and Shahrukh and said in a clear, steady voice, "I believe you because you believed in us first. You didn't just come to talk. You came to listen. You gave us books, but more than that, you gave us courage." She turned to the parents, her eyes shining with a fierce light. "If we do not stand with them now, we are saying that our dreams are lies. I will not let that happen. I stand with them." Her words cut through the hall like a blade of truth, silencing even the harshest whispers. Slowly, one by one, other children stood. Some crying, some smiling, each declaring in their own way that they believed. The parents looked at their children and saw not blind followers, but brave young souls, shining with a new, unbreakable fire. They began to move forward, pressing their palms together in silent respect. The reporters who had come to capture a scandal found themselves recording something far stronger, a quiet uprising of hearts, a moment of pure raw unity that no headline could fully describe. Outside, as the rain finally slowed, the air felt cleaner, as if the city itself had exhaled. Sundar stepped out, looking up at the gray sky, feeling a single cold drop slide down his cheek like a tear. Shahrukh stood beside him, his shoulders straight, his breath steady. He no longer looked like a broken star. He looked like a man reborn. The children followed, gathering around them, some holding hands, others holding pieces of paper with sketches and small poems. An old woman approached, her back bent, her eyes foggy with age, but sharp with wisdom. She handed Sundar a small clay diya, its weak flame flickering against the damp air. "This is for you," she said in a voice rough like old cloth. "Keep the light alive." Sundar bowed deeply, taking the diya in both hands, holding it close to his heart. Shahrukh placed his hand over Sundar's, their eyes meeting in a silent promise that this light would never die as long as they stood together, far away. In the glass towers where the campaign against them had begun, men watched the live footage. In stunned silence, they saw not two men defeated, but two men standing stronger than ever, surrounded by a sea of small, bright hearts that refused to turn away. The cold-eyed leader from the meeting clenched his fists, realizing too late that the real power did not lie in money or media, but in the quiet courage of children and the unstoppable strength of truth. As the night settled over Mumbai, Sundar and Shahrukh walked down a narrow lane lit only by small diyas placed outside doors. They moved slowly, each step heavy with the weight of the day, but light with the glow of shared victory. Sundar looked at the children walking beside them, their small feet splashing in shallow puddles, their laughter echoing softly like tiny bells. He felt an ache in his chest, a beautiful ache that only comes when you know you are exactly where you are meant to be. At the end of the lane, they stopped. Sundar turned to Shahrukh, his voice low but strong. "This is just the beginning. They will come again, stronger, smarter. But remember, we have something they can never touch, the trust of these children and the silent power of standing together." Shahrukh nodded, his eyes bright with a mix of fear and fierce joy. "I am ready," he whispered. "I am no longer the man I was. I want to be the tree." Sundar smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "And you already are." Yes. They stood there. The children began to form a circle around them, holding hands, singing a simple song about hope and light. Sundar and Shahrukh looked at each other, then at the children, and for a long moment no one spoke. The silence felt like a deep river flowing through all their hearts, connecting them beyond words, beyond fear, beyond all the noise the world could make above them. The clouds finally began to part, revealing a moon that shone like a quiet guardian watching over them. The light touched each face gently, turning tears into pearls and smiles into small stars. Sundar closed his eyes, feeling the moonlight seep into his bones, feeling the universe whisper its quiet blessing, and somewhere deep inside, he heard the voice of that small boy again. "You are my tree, sir." Sundar opened his eyes, looked at Shahrukh, at the children, at the moon, and finally whispered to himself, "Yes, we are the trees now." As the night stretched on, the silent revolution continued to grow, not with fire and shouts, but with small hands, soft songs, and the unstoppable courage of standing quietly together.